Hi everyone, welcome to the session. Jamie, would you mind spotlighting mine and Myrna's videos? Thank you so much. So we're here today for our reunion session for the Global Youth Climate Training ahead of COP30 starting next week. We're really excited to be having you all back and to use this session to really think about what we've got planned for COP and how we can come together.
Hi, everybody. Like Clarissa, we're so happy to see you again. Thank you for joining us. Like Clarissa said, we're super excited to show you what's going on in COP and hear from you. If, if you could please, if you're confirmed to go to COP and you'd like to work with GYCT activities or kind of just get involved with any speaking opportunities, could you write your name, your email, and your area of expertise in the chat? Please don't put anything else so I can copy and paste into a document. Thank you and look forward to the session.
Nice, thanks, Myrna. And I think if you are part of this program, you probably know us by now, but we will be your moderators today. I'm Clarissa, and this is Myrna. So in terms of what we've got in store for you today, our key objectives are to offer an overview of the themes of COP30, the kind of strategic areas, to capture your priorities and messages, and to explain how to navigate searching for COP negotiation updates and decisions, because we know it can be overwhelming. This is a bit of the agenda. We'll be kicking off with our kind of welcome and why this matters. Then we'll be going into what to expect at COP30 with Alexis presenting how to keep up virtually, breakout rooms for you guys to discuss together, and then closing. Cool. So before we hand over to Alexis to present a bit about the strategic objectives of COP and what you can expect, we wanted to say a few words about why this matters, why we wanted to bring everyone together today. We really believe in the community that we've built and in supporting you guys to connect with each other. We know COP can be pretty overwhelming. And this is the first COP in a few years where action, collective action and protest can actually take place. So it's a really exciting one, and we wanted to give you all a space to come together and think about how to really use that and build momentum. Myrna, did you want to say anything before we hand over to Alexis?
Nothing. I'm very excited to hear Alexis's presentation, and thank you to the people that are already sharing their names, emails, and interests. Go ahead, Alexis.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We will hand over to Alexis, who you will also know as one of our awesome program organizers on the Global Youth Climate Training.
Thanks so much, guys. I'm really happy to be here and I'm really excited for our chat later. The this is the end of our 3-year journey on global youth climate training, and we're kind of taking stock over the Christmas break to figure out what comes next. But just wanted to say to start off that we have our impact report that's been launched today. Clarissa led and did all of the work on this with a lot of support from the GYC members, to kind of Maren in particular, who did a lot of the review of this. But we're really excited that this has all come out today on the day of our last session, almost like we planned it that way. But we'd love for you guys to check out the impact report. It's shared on our LinkedIn, and I'll put the link in the chat just now, but it would be great to have you read through and see yourselves reflected in that report. But what I'll cover today is essentially how COPs work and what to expect a little bit on the road to COP30. Myrna will be covering a lot of the kind of expected negotiation items for COP30, so I'll leave the bulk of that to her, and I'll kind of get us through a lens of historical lens of what has happened in the past and how we've ended up here today. So basically, kind of a bit of a does the governance of climate change matters? Intro to the UN Framework Convention and a short history of COPs, a little bit about what to expect from COP30, and then just how grassroots activism and COP interact before I hand over to Myrna. So essentially, I just want to give a bit of a primer, knowing that people will be very familiar with this, obviously, but just to get us kind of on the same page. So the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change was signed in 1992 in Rio, which is why it's a special COP this year, because back in the country where it all started, so it's an exciting moment because 3 conventions were signed in Rio, and this is kind of the return for the climate convention back in Brazil. The Conference of the Parties, so the COP, is basically the signatories of the convention, of the UN Framework Convention, brought together once a year for climate negotiations. And the governing architecture at the moment is the Paris Agreement, which was signed 10 years ago this year, signed in 2015. And prior to that, we were governed under the Kyoto Protocol, which was negotiated in 1997, which was famously never ratified by the United States. The US Senate passed a resolution that basically said that unless everyone cut emissions, that they would not sign, because one of the key features of the Kyoto Protocol was that there was a split between kind of emerging economies and developed economies over who would cut emissions. And so that was one of the holdbacks in Kyoto that has ended up kind of the design has been integrated to solve for this in the Paris Agreement, which I'll speak about in just a second. And just a bit of personal family history. There's a picture of my dad there, who was the legal advisor to the Canadian government during the Kyoto negotiations in 1997. So kind of a fun mix of family history. And my dad speaks about that kind of experience with a lot of similarity to the COPs that have come since. So basically, just want to ground us in why is Paris so different, or why does Paris matter? And especially there'll be a lot of discussions about Paris this year, obviously, because it's 10 years. But essentially, the architecture of Paris is quite important, mainly that Paris is built on this idea of nationally determined contributions. So while each country has to contribute to the global goal of limiting warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius, each country decides how to do that in their own way, which is kind of a bug and a feature of the Paris Agreement. It allows each country to really put forward what their contributions will be. But, critics have argued that it allows us to be, relatively lower on ambition than we maybe otherwise would have with a binding treaty that was top down. But I guess in climate negotiations, it always comes down to, do you want an imperfect treaty that everyone signs, or a perfect treaty that, you have some people missing from? Not to say that Kyoto is a perfect treaty. So the nationally determined contributions are underpinned by this concept of common but differentiated responsibility. So there's common responsibility to do something about climate change, but differentiated in the sense that the United States or Canada has a different responsibility to, for example, Fiji, so that there are different circumstances and different levels of contributions required from different countries. And the final part of Paris is that it's binding in nature, adopted by 196 countries, and that the temperature limit or the temperature embedded into Paris is as much a scientific reality as it is a political negotiation. So the language in the text is well below 2 degrees, but with a preference for limiting warming to 1.5 degrees. This was very politically contentious at the time that it was negotiated. And I'm sure you'll see in Brazil discussions around holding the line on 1.5 degrees. So making sure that we don't abandon 1.5 degrees, but really stick to that temperature limit. And the other feature that will be important, that you'll notice a lot discussed at this year's COP, is the nationally determined contributions. So basically, each country, as I mentioned, chooses what their contribution will be to the global goal that's embedded in Paris. And the idea is that these are progressively more ambitious. So from the first NDC submission to now the third by COP30, this is the big deadline for this year, it needs to be progressively more ambitious. And essentially what happens is that countries have been invited to submit their NDCs. The deadline was February, but obviously, as with everything, people were late, and so they extended out the deadline. So actually, I'd love a fact check if all NDCs have now been submitted. I think there's probably still some stragglers ahead of COP, but we should expect a lot of existing analysis and further analysis during COP around the different NDCs. Oops. And just as a little note, you can look at all of the NDCs on the UNFCCC's NDC registry page. So if you search this, the NDC registry, you can click through. This is just a screenshot of the webpage. You can see that there's Indonesia's, South Africa's, Malaysia, Kyrgyzstan, etc. And you'll see the date that they submitted. So a lot of them in the last few weeks, or a few kind of six weeks or so. And sometimes they also include a cover letter, which is the same as a cover letter when you're submitting your CV for a job, sort of a preamble or explanation of what to expect from the NDC. And now there is no single format for an NDC, so I'll just give you two quite different examples. This is the UK's NDC. It's, I would say, leaves much to be desired on design. It's just a Word document with black text, which is a bit boring, I'll say, but the UK is a bit boring, so fair enough. But I will give them points for submitting before the deadline. They submitted in January 2025. So they might be boring, but they're good at delivering their homework on time. And essentially, this document will demonstrate what the UK has committed to as part of its nationally determined contributions. And a part that I thought was quite interesting as part of the NDC is essentially the sort of internal governance or planning arrangements that the UK government will deliver in order to make sure that it can actually follow through with everything it's promised in its NDC. So they, for example, mentioned the Climate Change Act, which was passed in 2008, which is basically the UK government's legal commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So this is one example of the UK's NDC. Another example is Vanuatu's. So this is Vanuatu's, a bit more interesting on the design. But one thing I really find interesting about Vanuatu's NDC is that obviously they've structured, the commitments that they have, but also the sustainable development goal that's most relevant to this promise. The finance required, and specifically the preferred sources of finance. So they list earlier in the document different sources of financing, and here they kind of demonstrate the amount and their preferred source. And they also note their progress from the last time they submitted their NDC. So there's been moderate progress on this one, but substantial on this one, which I just think is a nice way of laying out any kind of policy document in this way. So essentially the message there is just that it's a really good opportunity to read the NDC of the country that you're either from or the country that you're trying to influence ahead of COP30 to really understand what have they committed to in the international landscape. There's also analysis that's already been done on many of these NDCs. So there's a website called the Climate Action Tracker that tracks and basically rates the quality or the level of commitments in the different NDCs. And the US is an interesting example because if you go onto the NDC registry, it is still the NDC that was submitted by the Biden administration nearly a year ago in December 2024, because the Trump administration has moved to exit the Paris Agreement, which will take effect as of January 2026. So it's still listed now because as of now, the United States is still technically in, but you can see that, they have been rated as critically insufficient across almost all categories, apart from one, which is highly insufficient. So not great on the homework front. I'll give a very whistle-stop tour of basically what has happened since Paris. And just you'll get these slides afterwards, and just to say that the links under each of these is a link to the carbon brief summary of that COP. So for those who are not already familiar with Carbon Brief, it's a kind of specialist news outlet that focuses on climate, but specifically does excellent coverage of climate COPs. And basically will be giving daily updates, but also at the end of COP, they do a massive roundup of everything that happened across the 2 weeks. And so for those who are there, or for those who are not going to be there, it's a really good place to start to really understand how all the different negotiating items progressed through the COP. So COP21, which was the creation of the Paris Agreement in 2015, worth noting that we're not exactly 10 years behind on the numbering for COPs because we missed one during COVID. So we would otherwise be at COP31 this year, but we had a gap year basically for COVID. So COP21, we had the creation of the Paris Agreement. COP22 in Marrakesh really focused on turning Paris into a blueprint for action. And there was already discussions at that time that countries really needed to scale up the amount of finance that they were delivering to get to the $100 billion a year by 2020 goal, which was embedded into the Paris Agreement. COP23, which was the first COP to be hosted by a small island developing state, hosted by Fiji, but actually physically located in Bonn at the UNFCCC Secretariat. This was just logistical considerations due to the difficulty of traveling for lots of people to Fiji. It was the first COP after Trump announced a withdrawal of the United States the first time. And I really liked that there was an integration, a facilitative dialogue, as the UNFCCC calls it, what was renamed the Talanoa Dialogue, which is a Fijian word for basically a facilitated dialogue that centers around 3 questions. Where are we? Where do we want to go? And how do we get there? So this dialogue really was the focus of COP23 around creating kind of a framework for action and implementation. COP24 in Katowice in Poland, this was quite notable because we saw business leaders, so non-state players, calling for bold targets and clear timelines. So really saying we don't want this to exist only in the policy landscape. We want to be able to have reliable rules and timelines in the policy landscape in order to inform business behavior. COP25, which was originally going to be hosted in Santiago in Chile, but got moved to Madrid as a result of social unrest and social uprising. And so there was a bit of a failure in Madrid to agree on carbon credits, so Article 6 rules, which was moved to the following year. There was a discussion over the gender action plan, so ensuring that climate action can be done in a gender inclusive way. And there was early discussions around technical support for loss and damage through something called the Santiago Network, which is basically a technical assistance platform, but no discussion yet of actual cold hard cash. COP26 hosted in the UK. In Glasgow, we saw in the text a commitment to phase out coal and fossil fuel subsidies, which was sort of the first real foothold on a discussion around fossil fuel phase out, which we later kind of saw come to fruition during the COP in Dubai 2 years later. And there was a lot of discussion around accelerating the development and financing of clean technologies. COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, there was the historic moment of the Loss and Damage Fund agreed, which was basically this decision to create and establish a financial mechanism for climate reparations, and more discussion around private finance for clean tech. in Dubai, we had the first COP text to call for a transition away from fossil fuels. And there was this discussion around double down, triple up by 2030. So double down on energy efficiency, triple up renewable energy capacity by 2030. And of course, controversy over the COP28 presidency role in using their diplomatic access to broker new oil and gas deals. And finally, the most recent COP in Baku in Azerbaijan, there was a discussion or accusation around process issues. So India and Nigeria were not present in the room when the decision was gabbled through. So clear process issues, although all the discussions and remaining sections of Article 6 were finalized. And yet again, controversy over the COP29 presidency using diplomatic access for oil and gas deals again. So very whistle-stop tour, and obviously does not cover everything, but just to give you a bit of context, when you hear some things talking about the Gender Action Plan or the Breakthrough Agenda, you'll sort of understand just how long these things are in motion before they end up on the table. With an eye on time, I'll basically just briefly introduce this idea that the presidency has put forward, which is this idea of a global mutirão. For those who are Portuguese speakers, I apologize for the pronunciation, but it's essentially developed from a Tupi-Guarani concept, so an indigenous concept around supporting each other in times of need. So it's essentially picking a topic area, deciding who you need around the table, how to plan for you know, the steps that need to happen between you and the objective that you have, and making sure that you perform it with warmth and inclusivity and share your best practices. So this has sort of been the framing for the COP30 around having different mutirãos around that begin before and extend through beyond COP30. So kind of problem solving in this format. So I think Marina will cover this, but just to say, at a COP, you basically have within the Blue Zone, you obviously have negotiations that happen in plenaries, but also in contact groups or informals or informal informals. But also outside of the negotiations, you have official side events and exhibits. You have pavilions, so country pavilions. So for example, Canada will have a Canadian pavilion where they'll have events hosted that are relevant to the Canadian government's commitments or relevant to Canadian audiences, or people interested in Canadian climate commitments. And then you have the green zone. So you do not need accreditation to enter the green zone. You'll have side events and exhibits there as well. And then usually the host city is the site of lots of climate-related events during the COP. So you'll see those events in Belém that have nothing to do with the UNFCCC, just because they know lots of people are in town and are interested in climate. So what can observers do at a COP? What can you really engage on? I think the main thing is pick an area, follow it, and provide tailored inputs to parties. So this is an example from my colleague, Dr. Ingi Johnstone, who has been following the Article 6 negotiations really, really carefully. And this was something that she produced during the negotiations, sitting in the negotiations, basically walking through, okay, this is option 1 on the table, but it's actually in lowest environmental integrity. And for these reasons, here are the pros and the cons, all the way to the higher environmental integrity outcomes, option 3 that was on the table, pros and cons, and kind of a summary and a bit of a rationale and further references and reading. So this kind of rapid response, tailored inputs, expert inputs are really helpful. But also there are other ways to be helpful. You can support with note-taking. You can ask delegations if they need support to get notes from meetings. This is a really helpful way to support particularly small delegations. So a good way to do that is just to go to some of the plenaries and see if you can meet and chat with negotiators and ask them, say, I'm here for 2 weeks, how can I support you? There might be areas where they need just a body on the ground to be there, cover notes, and inform the negotiator what has happened. But it's a good opportunity at COP to just attend the daily coordination meetings of your constituency. So if that's you know, Ringo, Research and Independent NGOs, that's where a university like Oxford would sit, but there's a women in gender constituency or trade unions. You can kind of choose that based on your constituency in order to be around other similar climate professionals. You can also choose side events based on the information gaps you want to fill and who you want to meet and collaborate with. So, for example, this whole Global Youth Climate Training Program emerged from a side event on kind of youth engagement in nature, I believe. Just to say, it's a good bit of walking you'll be doing because the venue is enormous. So bring comfortable shoes, bring snacks, bring layers. It will be cold with air conditioning inside, and bring vitamins. It's a really easy time to get sick. And if you're not there and you want to build momentum from afar, you know, position papers or writing about the outcomes is a really helpful way to support your colleagues who are on the ground, giving them some, you know, often you don't have the headspace to analyze the different options. So it's a good way to do that and present positions or ideas or inform negotiations on the ground. You can also attend some meetings virtually if you have a virtual badge, or you can consolidate notes for meetings. So if your colleague can send you, or your friend, or anyone in the GYCT who's going, they can send you their messy notes from meetings and you can polish them up and send them back, or you can allow them to send you voice note reflections and you write them up as well. So this is something that's really helpful, just being almost like a personal assistant while they're there and supporting them while they're on the ground. You can also follow key Twitter accounts or others to keep up to date with the track of negotiations that you're following, or organize COP debriefs in the city that you live in, or writing to your decision makers about what you support or do not support, about how they've behaved in the negotiations. Just to close, I'll just say, you know, fossil fuel lobbyists will be present at COP30. Their presence has been growing over the years. There were about 500 at COP26 in Glasgow. There were 1,700 at COP29 in Baku. So in just 3 years, massive increase in the number of fossil fuel lobbyists at COP. But also activists will also be always present in those spaces. My one claim to fame is that I'm in the very corner of this photo, just here. You can see the side of my face. But activists will always be present there. They will always be holding decision makers to account. Especially young people are always really key and central to organizing demonstrations and moments that really remind negotiators what they're there to do, who they're there to serve. And I just think, as Clarissa mentioned, this is one of the first COPs in a while where public protest is on the cards in a way that is safer than in previous years. So it's a good moment to really, show up in those spaces and do actions and organizing moments. I don't know if Marina will speak to this, but just to give one last piece of advice, if you're organizing an action within the UNFCCC space, you do need to request permission for it. Otherwise, you can be debadged and removed, and it will not be allowed back into the blue zone. So if you're going to do an action, you just need to request permission for it. And maybe Myrna will have some guidance on how to do this. Otherwise, I will just put some information in the chat. That's all for me. I want to pass on to Myrna, who has lots of amazing detail. And apologies if I was a bit out of it. I'm a bit under the weather today. But I'm really looking forward to the breakout rooms and discussions later. And I now see that there's lots of things in the chat, so I will also look at those while Myrna is presenting. Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. Hi, everyone. I hope you can see me and my screen. Alexis honestly did a brilliant job. So I'm just gonna go into a little bit more detail on like the COP agenda and the thematic areas, and then we'll go into really fun breakout rooms. Let me see if I can. I think my remote control is not working at the moment. Yes. So Jamie, can you go into the next slide while we figure this out? Thank you. So yes, so click to start. Done. So obviously we all know that this COP is happening this November from the 10th to the 21st in Belém, Brazil. This is a little bit of details about what actually, like who's meeting in this COP. So this is the 30th COP, like Conference of the Parties to the UNFCCC, right? But this is also the 20th time that the COP serving as the meeting of the parties to the Kyoto Protocol is meeting, the 7th time that the COP serving as the meeting of the parties to the Paris Agreement is meeting, etc. So it's COP is often used unanimously to talk about the Conference of the Parties to the UNFCCC, but there's a lot of subsidiary or like a lot of agreements and meetings that also happen inside of COP. So this COP will center around money, climate finance, adaptation, which is obvious from a country that is very affected by the impact of climate change, the energy transition, which is related, and they have 6 main themes. I'll read them in another slide, but you can see them here. One thing that, as Alexis mentioned, the US has left the Paris Agreement, although not officially, but Trump did pull out. So there's going to be probably a lot of discussion on how to kind of move forward with that. And this is Andre Arjona Claro Delago, a veteran climate diplomat, and he has been appointed as the COP30 president. So my remote control is still not working. So can we go to the next slide? Don't really. Thank you. So this is some terms that I mentioned before, but are really important. The CMA, again, is the Conference of the Parties serving as the meeting of the parties to the Paris Agreement. The SBI is the subsidiary body for implementation, which focuses on the practical sides and implementation. And then the SBSTA is the subsidiary body for scientific and technological advice. Still not working. Can you go to the next slide? So Brazil has come up with an action agenda, which is what mobilizes voluntary climate action from civil society, businesses, investors, etc. And it includes can we go to the next slide? The 6 thematic areas. Thank you. Which is energy transition, transitioning energy industry and transport, stewarding forests, oceans, and biodiversity, transforming agriculture and food systems, building resilience for cities, infrastructure, and water, fostering human and social development, and unleashing enablers for accelerators. So basically, again, these are the 6 things that Brazil, or thematic areas that Brazil aims to kind of explore in most detail during this COP. And this is also what we're going to have the breakout rooms be under, the themes that we're going to discuss in the breakout rooms. Next slide. So for each thematic, so again, this is supposed to be the COP of implementation. A lot of COPs tend to say that they're the COPs of implementation. Everyone really wants to move on from policy negotiation into actual implementation. So what Brazil has done to prove that they're a COP for implementation is that they have devised 30 key objectives under each of their thematic pillars to try to reach in the negotiations during COP. Will all these objectives be reached? Probably not. But they'll all be discussed, and I believe that they have increased the number of objectives, so yeah, at least reach a small number, like something is better than nothing. Next slide. You guys are gonna get these slides, so I'm not gonna read everything on them. I'll just send it to you in an email. So every COP has thematic days. Sometimes, like in COP 27 in Egypt, they're very precise. So like November 10th is Youth Day, etc. What they've done in Brazil is they've kind of made them into ranges. So days 10 and 11 will highlight adaptation, cities, infrastructures, etc. And 12 and 13 is health, jobs, education, and so on. Basically, that means that pavilions or side events and negotiations will focus on these topics on those specific days. So for example, if my priority is the topics that are dealt with in week 2, I might attend week 2 and not attend week 1 as much. Next slide. So every year, the COP president comes up with a letter to discuss their priorities at COP or what they aim to do. So Brazil decided to make COP30 a milestone for implementation again and like move on to a post-negotiations phase. The presidency proposed a circle of presidencies to ensure continuity and cooperation. Basically, the current COP president wants to get with like the Baku COP president, the Egypt, etc., to discuss what could have like forward action and collaborative action. Additionally, Brazil is home to a lot of indigenous people, and generally indigenous people are not, they don't have very easy access to COPs, right? I mean, we're all seeing how difficult it is to get there. So this COP, because of Brazil's high indigenous population or large indigenous population, they decided to have a circle of indigenous leaders to integrate traditional and local knowledge into climate action and really give like a focus on that. Additionally, they will introduce a global ethical stocktake. So Alexis already discussed the NDCs with you guys, but so there's a global stocktake that monitors the NDCs, right? To see how countries are doing and if our current commitments are have us on track to reach the 1.5. The results of the previous or the first stocktake was in COP28, and the answer was a resounding no. We are not on the right track. The stocktake happened. It's a 3-year process, but they're like their decision comes out every 5 years. And that's the global stocktake. What Brazil wants to do is have an ethical stocktake that doesn't just discuss policy and science, but also integrates ethics into the equation. And it really wants to like have indigenous people and women and activists kind of have, it's composed of 6 national regional dialogues, apologies. And then they're all condensed into a synthesis report and discussed along with the results of the global stocktake in COP30 to inform the negotiations and the decision. Finance is a top priority in this COP. So in the previous COP in Baku, we've decided on the new quantitative collective goal of mobilizing 1.3 trillion. I'll talk about it in more details in the upcoming slide. But deciding to mobilize money doesn't really explain how you're going to do that. So the president said that their priority is to kind of make a roadmap on how to mobilize this money. Additionally, the enhanced transparency framework, which just supports developing countries to build institutional capacity for regular government-led climate reporting. They want to focus on technology, adaptation, just transition, and forests and biodiversity, and involve non-state actors more, not just governments. I'll talk more in the next slide about the stuff in detail. Yeah. So the focus on adaptation, again, Brazil is, yes, thank you. So Brazil is very highly affected by climate change. So they really care about adaptation. We've discussed adaptation versus mitigation in the previous session. But the majority of international climate funding, or 65%, flows from developed countries to developing countries, go into mitigation as opposed to adaptation. This is all details that Alexis has kind of already discussed, but at COP29, government agreed on a new overarching climate finance target, the new collective quantified goal, NCQG, which is what I mentioned in the previous slide. To scale climate finance up to at least 1.3 trillion per year. However, they added that developed countries should lead the mobilization of at least 300 billion a year, but also include developing countries and the private sector into that quantitative collective quantified goal. But how is that to be done is going to be discussed in this call. I think this might work. Yes. So they want to make a Baku to Belém roadmap to the 1.3 trillion. With the developed countries taking the lead, but all actors working together to enable the 1.3 trillion goal. Obviously, it's not going to be legally binding, but it would facilitate the delivery of the 1.3 trillion. This link is to look at the updates on the work plan. The most recent update was on the 27th of October. Now, why the energy transition? So, Belém, again, with the focus on adaptation and being on implementation. They want to promote worldwide adoption of clean energy sources. And COP28 and the GST closed with an agreement that signals the beginning of the end of the fossil fuel era. Basically, the GST said that we have to move away from fossil fuels or fossil fuel energy, which was really important that they kind of used that language. So the question since COP28 has been how to advance and monitor the implementation of these goals. And hopefully this will be discussed and kind of explained in more detail this COP. And they have additional priorities like the global NDCs and Brazil's Tropical Forests Forever facility. Global NDCs, again, Alexis discussed the NDCs previously, but the global NDCs is basically to have the private sector or non-governments also make climate commitments, not just governments. So they haven't really explained how they plan on doing that. That's also going to be discussed in COP, but their aim is to bring a new dynamic to global climate action, aligning the efforts made by businesses and civil society and all levels of government and coordinated action. So they kind of just want to add here commitments, not just from governments, but from other influential entities. And Brazil's Tropical Forests Forever facility is an initiative designed to create financial incentives for protecting forests. Because, well, the Amazon forest is in Brazil, right? So the true irony is, and this always happens at COP, Alexis mentioned that lobbyists, fossil fuel lobbyists are COP lobbying against concrete or phase out decisions. Here, Brazil decided to have COP30 in Belém to be like a gateway to the Amazon, to kind of show people the importance of what we're doing. Now, the problem is to facilitate access to Belém, they cut down a lot of forests to create a road, which is very ironic for someone that says that they are protecting forests. Obviously, because of that, people were affected, like their financial and living situations were affected, like Claudio Verquete, whose income came from harvesting acai berries from trees that once occupied the space that was torn down to create the road to Belém. So it's been a very ironic and controversial move from the Brazilian government, but that often happens with governments leading COP, honestly. So, how negotiations actually work. We talked about the bodies earlier, the CMA, the SBI, and the SBSTA. So that's how the negotiations are structured. Negotiations are done under different bodies. And people and NGOs, governments are governments are the ones leading the negotiations. But then observer organizations like NGOs, intergovernmental organizations, research institutions, youth groups, etc., they engage as observers, and they can attend some open negotiations. So some negotiations at COP are closed for parties only, and some are open. UN entities, it depends on which badge you're holding. UN badges can enter most negotiations, but some negotiations are limited to party only, so much so that even if you have a party overflow badge, which means party means that you're kind of an official government negotiations. Party overflow is that you are with the government, your government, but you're not part of the negotiators. So it depends on what badge you have, what access you have. And there's a lot of negotiations that happen, obviously. So rather than having many separate decisions, the presidencies usually they bundle the key outcomes into a single overarching decision. And negotiated texts are difficult to read. They're often full of jargon, and they progress through the event or the COP. They begin with bracketed options, so parties may or should or urge to or are invited, etc. And as the negotiations progress on each specific topic, the wording gets clarified. The early days at COP tend to focus on setting the agendas, opening plenaries and procedural matters, and then it kind of gets more and more detailed, and the mid to late days are more intense negotiations, and it ends at the last day, preferably, but it never really does. So if this COP is supposed to end on the 21st, negotiations usually last after until like the 23rd or so, and some areas are never fully agreed upon, and so they're moved either to the SBIs or to the next COP. And technical sessions run in parallel with high-level political negotiations, and that's why Alexis mentioned that you should have, like, you should know what your focus is if you're going to COP, because if you don't, then you're gonna get lost amongst all the side events and all the pavilions, and you're not gonna be able to follow your preferred negotiation tracks. Track. Another thing is that some negotiation tracks are more popular than others. For example, in COP27, the loss and damage negotiations were open, but sometimes the room would get really full really quickly, and then no one would be allowed to go in, and sometimes people would be kicked out. So that was fun. How to read a decision text. So they start with a preamble, or like setting the context and acknowledgement, which body is responsible for these negotiations, etc. And then what's important is kind of the operative text, which is what's action oriented, what's actually urged of part or requested of parties, etc. So this is how most of them go. The heading is just the title, and then the preamble, which is the contextual framework, the objective that the text aims to achieve, what's the scope or what are the boundaries of the text, what's the guiding framework, and then the actual commitments, which are the obligations of parties, what are the mechanisms of implementing the commitments, who's responsible for what, and the deadlines. Not all decision texts are gonna always have all of these, but that's kind of the idea. And this is an example of these are the bracket placeholders. This is what changes into invites, which is kind of the softest tone, or strong urges, may, should, and shall, and these kind of get developed further through the negotiations. And often there are options presented for each action point, and then they're negotiated into one single option. So if you are not, or if you are attending COP in person, or if you're not attending it, but you want to keep up, what should you follow? Focus on the negotiation track that you're interested in, energy transition, for example. Follow the changes in the bracket, the text. See if they're using, what language they're using, phase out, phase away of fossil fuels. Whether the COP cover decision, the final decision is adopted and what it contains. Did they actually follow the BLM 4x Sustainable Fuels Pledge, and how many parties are going to sign on? What is the final decision on the Tropical Forests Forever facility, and if they address the deforestation that occurred prior to COP? The language on loss and damage, adaptation, funding, or just transition, gender equity, climate justice, etc. If non-state commitments are actually or pledges are actually integrated, how much finance was agreed to be mobilized, and how, for example, operationalization, and how to turn commitments into programs, how inclusive this COP ends up being, which is very important for COP30 because of how expensive and exclusionary it is, and whether and then post-COP, whether these outcomes or commitments were actually transformed into national action plans or not. And then this is kind of what I really want to show you guys, which is how to follow along with everything. So, well, first, this is the Observer Handbook, which is publicly available and really helpful for people that are going to be at COP. I know you can't see it. Oh.
Sorry, Marina, that link doesn't seem to be working.
Yeah, it's okay. It works on the slide, so I'll just show it like. So you can click on it yourselves, but it provides how like a map to the blue zone where the pavilions are. Okay. Am I scrolling? Yeah. So it says a code of conduct. Sorry, guys, it's a bit laggy, but yeah, this is what it has. COP30 at a glance. What is UNFCCC? What are COPs? What are the key outcomes from COP20? What are the agenda items for COP30? How to register, what the logistics are going to be, what the map is like, who are the observers. It's kind of honestly what we did in this session, but in like a very precise handbook. So it's very helpful for you guys to have it. Can we go back to the slides, Jamie? Thank you. I don't know how long it'll take to open the stuff, so I don't really want to, but this link is to the COP30 schedule. Okay, I'll talk as I try to open it. You actually follow the negotiation. Oh, there we go. So if you go through it, you'll see what's happening every day. This is pre-COP stuff, and this is what COP actually starts. If it has webcast incoming, that means that if you have a virtual badge, you can watch the live stream of the event. And then on the UNF, can we go back to the slides, please? On the UNFCCC YouTube channel, they actually have they actually put out some of the negotiations or some events happening at COP. So that's the last one. This has daily updates for what's happening at COP. Yes. So UN climate talks or END or TWN, they provide day-to-day updates for what's going on at COP if you are struggling to follow the actual website. And then can we go back to the slides, please? Thank you. The last two links I want to open is the main COP page, which is where you can get all the everything really. It's a little hard to navigate at first, to be completely honest, but as soon as you get used to it, it becomes a little bit more intuitive. But the documents are where you're going to find all the draft decisions. For example, the CMA, the Paris Agreement, 7th session document. You're going to see what's been talked about, what will be talked about. Access, like the latest document was on the 29th of October, etc. Or no, 31st of October. Sorry, it's a bit laggy for me at the moment. Can we vote? Okay. There we go. This is also where the schedule and meetings are gonna be. The pavilions, the calendar, it's not super intuitive, honestly. But so take your time before COP to kind of go through it, so you actually know what to look out for when COP is happening. Can we go back to the slides, please? And then every country has their own website, which announces the country's priorities. So this is Brazil. It'll explain what is COP, what's the blue zone, what's the green zone, what are nationally determined contributions, national adaptation plans, etc. And then talk more about the actual Brazilian presidency. It's basically where I got everything on this presentation. We'll talk about the global ethical stocktake, the circle of presidents, the circle of peoples, Mutirao. I'm sorry, I butchered that, I'm sure. Which Alexis already mentioned. The action agenda. Which explains how to take part in the actual agenda and share your impact stories, which is something that if you're not going to COP, you can also do virtually. And then if you're actually going to COP, some services like accommodation, which is insanely expensive, etc. Can you go back to the slide? Thank you. And then Oh, this is also a link to the side events and exhibits that are going to be held in COP. And this is a submissions portal where countries submit like written inputs from parties and observers. Sometimes you'll have other NGOs, but like observer NGOs like Youngo, for example, be like, if you're on the newsletter, they'll open like, oh, submission for input on negotiation track, whatever. And then you can, if you're part of Youngo, which is the official constituency to the UNFCCC, you can add on to that your own input. This is some useful pre-readings for everyone if you're going or if you're not going. If you're an NGO without observer status, how to engage with COP, how to engage in decision making, and then just some relevant reports and the NDC Sensitives report, for example. COP for All is by Care About Climate, and they've, if I can open it, they've noted how inaccessible this COP is going to be and pledged to kind of provide updates on their platform. So this is a very cool initiative if you also follow that hashtag. And can we go back to the slide? Thank you. And what's another thing that that Alexis mentioned that's important is that sometimes, often a lot of coverage on COP decisions is in English, although the decisions are often translated into multiple languages. But if you can localize that into whatever your home language is, that would be great engagement, even if you're not going to COP, because it'll kind of expand who's able to join in on or keep updated on what's going on in the conference. I think that's it. Yes, that's all. I don't actually have details on how to do actions. So I'm sure Alexis, I can't see the chat, but I'm sure Alexis put something in there. But and she also gave you guys great information on how to engage if you're not actually going to COP. But my biggest thing, especially because I'm from Egypt and not a lot of information is translated into Arabic, or especially in like interactive methods. So my biggest advice for you is if you can't go to COP, to follow the briefings, follow the negotiations, and then localize them to your own languages, and to, yes, pick, if you're actually going to the conference, pick a specific theme or interest and then follow along with that in detail so you don't get lost in everything. And just try to do just try to stick together and talk to other people, get their inputs on what's going on, and ask for advice because it gets really overwhelming over there. And familiarize yourself with the website with both websites, but especially the UNFCCC one, before COP starts, so you know how to engage. And that's all from me. I'll send you the slides again because I know I put in a lot of links and I couldn't go through all of them here.
Awesome. Thank you. Oh, no, go ahead.
Yeah. So I was just going to say, remember to put your name and email and specialization in the chat, especially if you are talking on climate migration, because we have a speaking opportunity on the 18th for that, if you're going to COP in person.
Nice. Thank you so much, Myrna. That was so detailed and really useful. And I definitely recommend to everyone to look through all the links and look at the slides later. The next part of the session is quite interactive, which will be fun because you've done a lot of listening. So we're going to be asking you to go into breakout rooms based on the 6 thematic areas of the presidency this year. So I'll read them out and put them in the chat, and then you can choose the breakout room with the name. And we also have a few prompt questions, and we're going to give you guys about 20 minutes to be together and to use those 20 minutes, 30 minutes to use those rooms to like really strategize and dig into those topics. So the 6 thematic areas are energy, industry and transport, forests, oceans and biodiversity, agriculture and food systems, cities, infrastructure and water, human and social development, and cross-cutting enablers like finance and technology. So I'll put those in the chat as well. And the kind of prompt questions that we have for you guys are: what are your key asks for negotiators on this theme? What should bursary delegates emphasize and what's missing from youth representation? Thank you, Alexis. Again, I'll put the questions in the chat as well as the slides because you might not be able to see the slides when you're in the breakout rooms. Just to clarify a bit on that second question, we have funded 5 of our Global Youth Climate Training cohort to attend COP this year. And if there's particular things that you guys want them to represent, especially if you're not going, then we'd really love to know.
I'll just
Great.
say
Yeah, go
the
ahead.
breakout rooms are named with each of these 6 areas. So pick the area that you're most interested in. So I'll just open them now. And so yeah, pick which of the ones are most relevant to your work.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I think we're all coming back from the breakout rooms now. I really hope that was useful and that you had a time to discuss and talk about shared priorities or maybe even form connections, and we can continue those at COP. I think some of you are already aware of this, but we do have a WhatsApp group, and I'm sure Myrna will circulate the details of how to join that if you are going to COP and want to stay connected with everything that's going on. We just wanted to highlight again the impact report. Alexis mentioned this earlier, but we are really proud of this. It represents 3 years of the program, and we'll be shouting about it all over LinkedIn and other platforms. So if you guys want to repost that, we'll share the links with you in the follow-up email. And yeah, we really want to amplify you guys. We're also using it as a call for funding, specifically to fund more youth participation in COPs. So yeah, the more everyone can support it, the more we can hopefully get it to the right people who can fund young people, because young people deserve it. One of the craziest statistics that I found from a youth climate justice study, which is a collaboration between ClimateWorks Foundation and some awesome youth organizers, is that less than 1% of global funding goes to youth-led climate projects, even though young people are going to be some of the most affected communities and are already leading a lot of the most ambitious climate solutions. So yeah, we're trying to drive more funding towards the youth movement through this work and this impact report. I think that's most of the things from us. Augustine, were you gonna speak at the end or not? Okay, I'm gonna take that as a no.
No, August is here. Yeah.
Yeah?
Of
Okay, you are
course,
gonna speak. Okay.
Here.
Okay. I'll pass over to you then.
Okay. Thank you so much. And actually, again, I would love and appreciate if the 24 individuals that are here share a small clap or icon or whatsoever to Clarissa and the team that put all this energy to bring this report of the Global Youth Climate Training. Some of you are there, some of your photos, some of your ideas, some of your messages. But most important, your energy is there, guys, because you have been part of this. And we are thinking on how to evolve as a program, how to keep training more youngsters, and we want to have you involved in this process. So expect that if you're going to be in Belém, we should have a meeting with all of you. Today, I confirmed that around 25 of you are going to be at COP. This means that we are a massive task force with GYC. We are around 50 individuals in total in between GYC, GYCT, partners, the Airprize, and all the people around. So we have a bit of a chance to create a collective impact. And that's what I'm trying to bring right now. As you can see, just by asking you guys to share your voices, to share some hearts and some celebrations for Clarissa, we already can feel that the energies are flowing through us, and that's the most important thing that you need to bring here, because it's gonna 1 second. Yeah, you hear me well, right? Sorry, there's something in the boats again. I am here in the boat in the
Yeah, we can
boats.
hear you.
We came all the way down from the Rio Tapajós and now in the Amazon River to get to know also because imagine you feel some of you are sharing about the exclusion that you are being part of the COP30 because of the prices, the access to badges, and the access to the visas, and in general all these little challenges that we have. But imagine that you live 1,000 kilometers from the site that COP30 is gonna take place. And even though that you hear it next door, you don't have access either. It's just around 700 Brazilian people, civil society, that will have access to COP. This means that grassroots communities, indigenous leaders, youth indigenous leaders that are even more down in the governmental change, I don't know how to say it, but they also have a structure. So they don't have, and most of the small communities are not represented. And for that, we had the blessing and the opportunity to hear 3 communities that are in the Rio Tapajós, and this zone is quite important for 2 reasons. The first reason is that it's one of the biggest sweet water reserve in the planet. It's like a huge, massive river of blue water. Like you think you are in the ocean, but it's actually just sweet water. And then second one is also hosting the second biggest, listen to me, the second biggest aluminum company in the planet after China. Is in the same sector. So we have 2 things: the biggest reserve of water for the planet and the second biggest aluminum company in the planet. What is this telling us already? What are the priorities of humans to produce and contaminate something such richful as the water that we drink? But at the end, we are also using the aluminum. We use it every time that we drink water in a soda can or beer or whatsoever that you're drinking. You use it for your devices. So all this understanding that the problem is there, but we are also part of the problem, not because we decided to, but the system itself was somehow designed during these years of existence as humans in the way that it has. And we have the amazing opportunity as youngsters, our generation especially, because we have been granted with access, initial just access to COP as observers. Now we have spaces in the round tables, in the discussions. And some of you guys are already decision makers, local level, in a regional level, or a global space such as COP. So I have been asked, and I'm always here to motivate you guys, but I feel this is not about motivation. This is about aligning our strategies. This is about understanding that there's different beliefs that we need to start talking around, like the ways that we do certain things are not the ways that others are doing. But even though we need to find a consensus as youngsters, a consensus as humans, to see how we can implement these SDGs that are already 4 years, almost 4 years before we need to complete them. And as we, or you have maybe read already, we already passed the 1.5 degrees goal. This is quite critical. It's critical for our future and for the ones that are coming. So come, if you're coming to COP, come with the energies of protesting, of course. But in my personal perspective, you need to come with solutions. They know what we need. They know it, but they don't know how to make it happen. So if you have any idea, or you have like campaigns like Sara from Italy was sharing from Fridays for the Future Italy, they are also doing certain campaigns. We as GYC, we will be push guys, and I was confirming with different partners and stakeholders during these days, we will be push some goal of protecting an area that is similar to 14 soccer fields, a territory for nature protected area. We as GYC want and can do this if we all unite. And there will be always noise around, but I really hope that we can align and present something and just come with open hearts and open minds, because it's there's already a lot of square people inside of COP, and we need to be more circular. We need to be like the solutions. So come not just with demands, with proposals. And I'm looking forward to see you all and waiting to see you all in the gala that we will be hosting for you guys the 18th of November, together with Youth Climate Collaborative and other youth organizations. Thank you so much, and looking forward to see you all in Belém. Yes, we are the solutions. Exactly. Thank you, Chi.
Thank you so much for speaking so wonderfully as ever. That was really, really wonderful. I think this is the end of our session. So I'll just put up our last slide, which is, as always, tag us everywhere. We want to hear from you. We will be sending out all the information about everything that's going to happen at COP. I was telling some people in my breakout room about the gala. People are excited, and we'll share the invitation widely. But yeah, I hope you took something from today. We're really grateful to everyone who joined and everyone who participated and chatted. These sessions are always so much better when people actually interact. So thank you. Thank you, Augustine, for your wonderful words to end. And Myrna, do you want to have the final word before you say goodbye?
Yes, thank you, everybody. I hope this was useful. Please join the WhatsApp group. We'll update it. I'll send you in the follow-up email some events from the GOAC and Oxford, but also please join the WhatsApp group. We're going to chat a lot more, share updates on events, and generally we all really want to get together, maybe take a picture, just kind of hang. It's really important to have networks in COP. Sometimes if this is your first one, especially, you'll see a lot of young people who are already in the kind of meet each other up, but they don't, but then you kind of feel not ostracized per se, but just you don't know how to engage. So yes, join the WhatsApp group, try to do a buddy system, like try to always talk to people. And we look forward to seeing the ones we're gonna see there. So excited to see you guys in person. Oh my God.
Yeah, I'm so jealous. You guys will have such a good time. And yeah, thank you, everyone. I think that is the end. Bye.
Thank you all. Bye.
This is the end.
To
Thanks
be
so much,
continued.
everyone.